your desks, this is the MediaPost ad, you have a gray folder that you can fold out and look at. We also put on maybe 30 shows over the year, but we do a series called Insider Summits, and we go away for 3 days and talk about all this same stuff really in depth. So take a look at these. They're exciting. They're fun to go to. Pass them around to the folks in your office that might want to attend. That's the future. Today, as I mentioned when I walked up here just a few minutes ago, we're shuffling things around. Some folks are late coming in on the trains. The room will fill out. The speakers will all be here. Steve will tell you in just a moment how we're going to do a little bit of a shuffle. But we're on. We'll keep the schedule going pretty much as it says in the agenda, except flipping some panels around. If you want to connect to Wi-Fi and you haven't figured out how to do that, the network to join is called OMA, O-M-M-A, and the password is MediaPost. So pretty easy. Get on Wi-Fi. We did that specifically for this room. The concept of the discussion this morning is all about goal-driven technology. Our goal in having you here at this conference is to learn a bunch, network a bunch, learn who your resources are. Everybody else in the room, you should know by the end of the day. And I think our key resource in putting this on, one is Message Gears, who's our sponsor for today. They have a table out front. Stop in and say hi to Will, I think is out there. So thanks very much for being here. I'm going to introduce you next to Steve Smith, who is MediaPost's editorial director for events, and he can get the day going for you. Steve.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. By the way, before I forget, for those of you who may have colleagues who aren't here but may be interested, we, as you can see from the camera in back, we live stream all of our MediaPost events, whatever goes on stage. We are a journalistically driven organization. What we do here, we regard as news. So if you go to the agenda page for this event at MediaPost, you will see the live stream, or you can refer your colleagues to any of the sessions that you think would interest them. Also, we archive everything, so usually by the end of the day or early the next morning, if you go back to the agenda, videos from all of the sessions on stage will be posted right at the agenda, so you can use them there. Those of you who are new to MediaPost, look, we are almost 2 decades old now. We are an editorially and journalistically driven organization. We have been focusing on the rise of technology and advertising now for 2 decades, but as I like to say, we don't cheerlead these technologies, we interrogate them. We try to scrutinize what these technologies mean, especially to our core constituency, which are marketers, media buyers, and planners, and that's what we're doing with marketing technology. A new term for something that's actually familiar and that we've covered in a lot of different ways before, but now it's become a thing. And what the hell is that thing? For the purposes of our approach, we use this, we're defining marketing tech as that stack of technologies that is distinct from advertising tech, which we have covered pretty extensively for the last 6 or 7 years. And this is technology that's aimed more directly at consumer relationships, aiming technology more towards satisfying business goals and outcomes than media buying. And let me be more specific. It's a large tent, and it can include, as we'll be making reference to throughout the day, DMPs, social listening tools, email platforms, content management tools, data mining and analytics, CRM, and for some, ultimately marketing clouds that at least claim to bring a lot of this stuff together and at times also link over to the ad tech stack. But unlike most of the ad technology that we often talk about here, marketing tech is aimed at specific marketing outcomes, deeper customer relationships, direct contact with customers themselves, ultimately a deeper understanding of the consumer path, and that's what we're looking at here. So it's more about things like generating leads, customer touch points, interactions, the lifetime value of the customer, feedback, and ultimately sales. And so MarTech is that bright, shiny object, but our role here is to scrutinize it, put it within the context of what marketers have to do with it, and try to see how it really maps against, ultimately, those business outcomes and strategies. So but it has some similarities to ad tech in the sense that ad tech established a whole set of precedents when it came to adopting technologies that are eerily similar. After seven or 8 years, we have developed this incredibly complex, often obtuse collection of ad technologies and acronyms that seems to confuse the hell out of everybody. And some would say that this is something that festered rather than evolved. And so taking some of those lessons forward as marketers start building a marketing tech stack is one of the ways of coming at this. So one of the things that I did in doing this first pass at creating an agenda about marketing technology for our events was to take our more journalistic perspective and apply it in a series of questions about some of these technologies and the ways they're being adopted by marketers. So, for instance, we know from the ad tech history that the tail has a tendency to wag the dog when it comes to technology. Very often, marketers and agencies will chase the technologies and the gadgets before necessarily contemplating whether it's really satisfying what they need to do. So one of the things we're going to start with one of our opening panels is discussing exactly that, and in one of our keynotes later this morning, is how do you map technology against strategy? How do you make sure that the technology really is being aimed at the outcome that you want? We're going to have, and then later on in the morning, we're going to be talking about the DMP, one of the first acronyms to emerge from the new marketing tech stack, and whether marketers really need them. We'll be hearing from a couple of marketers, one from OpenKey and one from JP Morgan Chase, talking about what DMP means to them and how they're building it. When it comes to leveraging data, tech, and personalization, email in many ways is among the most evolved technologies that we have. So we're going to be spending a session talking to a couple of email experts about the ways in which technology has evolved for them and the way it's plugging into the rest of their marketing stack. And then this afternoon, we're going to look at the process that everyone has had to go through with ad tech over the last few years, and that's just vetting the vendors themselves. How do you create a process where you can evaluate all of these technologies, all of these pitches, all of these bits and pieces that claim either to be doing everything for you in a single cloud or doing or best of breed in a specific task. So we're going to be looking at just that process of vetting vendors when it comes to marketing tech. And then we're going to look at content. If content is king online, it has now become, for many marketers, or at least they claim, it is the center of everything they do. And we're going to be asking, what does that really mean for a brand when content is being put at the center? And what does it mean for the sets of technologies that gain priority within the marketing stack? And then finally, we're going to round out the day talking about data itself, that fuel that seems to drive all of this technology. What are the policies that need to be put in place for that? But we start, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our keynote who is opening because she quickly raced here ahead of schedule to plug in so that we could flip around our schedule. But Katie Bisbee, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Donors Choose, is actually an old friend of MediaPost. Is a veteran of our email summits of the crowdfunding concept, and in this case, Donors Choose does crowdfunding for specific school projects, and she's going to talk about that, but in particular, she's going to talk about the ways in which, as a small organization, she's using technology to punch above the weight of her organization and feel and act in the market larger than the size of the company itself, lessons of how you can leverage this technology and use it for something like crowdfunding philanthropy. So please welcome one of our old friends, Katie Bisbee.
Thank you so much. It's great to see all of you here. I'm glad you guys are the ones that didn't get caught in Connecticut or New Jersey in the trains this morning. I'm going to start with a really quick video, and therefore I'm going to be able to bypass some of the introductory stuff. This is just a quick intro to donorschoose.org. While the video is getting started, I'll tell you all that my brother, who works in Manhattan and lives in Connecticut, at 10 o'clock last night called me and said, like, I can't leave the city. There are like 5,000 people in Grand Central, and he was considering taking an Uber to Connecticut, but he said it was going to be $800 or something. So he came over to my apartment and stayed in my apartment last night, and I don't get to see him very often because he's a little kid. So I have to confess that he and I stayed up way too late last night chatting and drinking wine, and then Steve called me early this morning saying, "Can you get here 2 hours earlier?" So that's my caveat about what the next 20 minutes of time together. Ready? Okay.
When I came into this classroom, we had 30 desks, 30 chairs, a teacher's desk. That was it.
Public school teachers spent $1.6 billion of their own money on classroom supplies.
I was a history teacher at a high school in the Bronx for 5 years, and it just occurred to me that there were people out there who'd want to help teachers like us if they could see exactly where their money was going.
Donors Choose is the greatest, simplest idea. Teachers go to the website and put up materials they need for something they want to teach. You, as a donor, choose a school, choose a project.
And you can fund part of a project or the entire project. It is magic.
Well, with Donors Choose, you know exactly where it goes. Every dime goes exactly to that project, and you hear directly back from those kids and from that teacher.
I use it for a lot of English and reading. But people also do field trips or a special project that maybe they need a piece of technology for.
We're moving into the age of technology, and the only way my kids really get those experiences are really at school.
To have someone out there give them books, the feeling that they get, they feel like somebody in the city cares, somebody in this country cares about me and my future and my potential, and that's a powerful thing.
Support our classroom, build a future.
Perfect.
So that's the background on what we do. So I'll zoom through the intro really quickly. You met Charles Best, who's our founder and our CEO. He started Donors Choose in his classroom 16 years ago. And at the time when he started it, it was a really revolutionary concept to allow individuals to go and pick exact classroom that they want to support, like see exactly where their money goes, and then hear back from the classroom. Even today, it's probably still rare that when you make a charitable donation, you get to choose where your money goes and see the exact impact of your donation. So really from our start, we had almost I think our model was more similar to, say, an e-commerce organization than it was to a typical nonprofit, which makes marketing there really fun. Teachers go on our site and post projects for anything they need for their classrooms, from dictionaries to calculators to technology to field trips, anything that they don't have the budget for. And then individuals go fund those projects. We ship the supplies directly to the school, and then the teacher sends a thank you note to the donor and pictures of the kids using the dictionary. So that's the quick explanation of what we do. In terms of our scope and scale, so we were started in a Bronx classroom 16 years ago. Today, 70% of public schools across America have at least one teacher using our site, and most of those schools are our country's highest poverty schools. Our mission, well, any teacher can use our services. Our mission is to really focus on those high poverty teachers. And then you can see our growth curve down here at the bottom, and we'll talk a little more about how technology helps us scale with a relatively small staff. So marketing. Let me talk just a little bit about marketing. So as a nonprofit, when we think about how we do branding, communications, when we think about our approach to talking about our organization, I do think we're really similar to most nonprofits. So kind of how we describe what we do, how we describe the efficiency of the donations we receive, how we serve our teachers, we have to have an incredibly high level of trust with our donors. So when I think about branding, I am very much peers with other nonprofits. When we think about marketing, what my job is as CMO is to get individuals to go onto our website, to pick something they care about, to open their wallet, to make a transaction, and execute on it on our site. So really, I think of my peers in the actual revenue side of the business as other marketers who are selling things online or trying to get someone to click through their articles or purchase tickets for a concert. It's really very much more of a marketing function. Obviously, our organization is a nonprofit, so we're run with a very big heart. It's like marketing with a big heart. But at its core, for example, my 2 email marketers, I would compare against any of the top for-profit email marketers in terms of their capability and the way they think and how they think about driving business. Does that make sense? Okay. Just to give you a sense of how much money we raised. So this school year, we actually 3 days ago hit $100 million in donations this school year, it was a huge goal of ours for years to get that far. So that's really exciting. So just under half of that comes from individual donors, and that's the part I'm talking about that's very similar to e-commerce. So we'll have 500,000 people give roughly $100 each. The other a little over half of that comes from a smaller number of corporate and foundation partners, and I'll give an example of what those partnerships look like a little bit further on. In terms of our Marcom stack, as you can see, it is quite simple and really pared down, I would say. A part of this, I looked up a whole bunch of other companies' Marcom stacks, and it would have taken, I think most for-profits would take several pages of this to actually explain how they spend their money and how they direct their time. For us, I think this is mostly just a budgetary issue. We just don't have the budget to be using a lot of marketing technologies. Pretty much our main focus is social media, anything we can do on the web, any sort of A/B testing we can do on our site. Email is a huge driver of revenue. And then we do all of our CRM in Salesforce and our analytics in Looker and in Google Analytics. I'm going to walk you through today how we go about acquiring donors and then how we go about getting them to come back. And you'll see that a lot of I think what I would theoretically consider a Marcom stack is related to word of mouth advertising on our website, or equipping our donors and teachers with word of mouth tools. We do have a separate version of this for our data stack and our actual website stack, and those are much more complicated. But marketing, the key for us really is word of mouth. So let me just talk a little bit about the one thing that was missing in that stack, and that is advertising technology. Well, we're so similar to e-commerce companies in how we conduct our marketing efforts. The one big difference is that we don't do advertising for 2 reasons. 1, we don't have the money to do it, and 2, it actually doesn't work. So we did an 18-month incredibly rigorous test of every sort of advertising and advertising technology you could think of. We did keyword searching, Facebook ads, affiliate marketing, retargeting. We even tried display. We tried everything. And the result of 18 months of gathering all these advisors and working incredibly hard at it is that people don't search for places to give their money away online. They search for shoes to buy or apartments to rent or articles to read. They do not search for places to give their money away. It was personally disappointing because I wanted to be the nonprofit to figure it out. But the big lesson and takeaway from that was that people give because they care about an organization and because someone is asking them to, either someone they know or kind of an influential party like a newspaper or a celebrity even. So I'll talk pretty quickly through, these are the key ways we do acquisition. So the first is fundraising pages. Anybody can go on our site and create a fundraiser and then share that fundraiser with their friends and family, their network. We have people do it for weddings, for birthdays, for marathons that they run. Really anything you can think of, people create these pages and then basically fundraise on our behalf. Gift cards is another big one for us. So a DonorsChoose.org gift card is just like a Gap gift card or a Barnes & Noble gift card. You can take one and if you had a $100 gift card, you could then go onto our site and pick a classroom project to support on someone else's dime, basically, whoever bought you the gift card. And then you get the thank you notes from the teacher and the photos of the kids using the projects. So gift card is a huge acquisition tool for us, not only because people buy them at the holidays, but a lot of companies give them out. I'll share a little more about that in a minute. Fundraising pages will raise for us, just to get like tactical and break that 100 million down. Fundraising pages are about $500,000. Gift cards, it's a little harder to look at the dollars, but it will probably bring us about 10,000 donors this year. Social sharing, this is one I'm sure everybody in the room spends a ton of time thinking about, and it's huge for us. So this is a classroom project on our site. It's a teacher who is requesting globes for her students, and you can see on this project page, we've got email, Facebook, and Twitter. We used to have a whole lot more sharing tools, but found that those three were just the most effective in actually driving conversions to our site. Email is the most effective, which is why we have it on the left-hand side. And teachers and donors and other people not as involved in our website, when they see projects, they share through this. And this social sharing will raise about $3 million through our website this year. Co-branded partnerships is an especially fun one. So are you all familiar with the eyeglasses company Warby Parker? Okay, a lot of nods. They're doing revolutionary stuff in the eyewear business by having fashion, really high quality frames, but since they manufacture themselves, they can sell them all for $95 or $150. So Warby designed a line of sunglasses for DonorsChoose.org, and you can't see it in this photo, but the frame of the sunglasses had a yellow line around it, and it was the yellow iconic school bus color. They were pretty cool. And they wanted to give, so the sunglasses sold for $95, and they gave $30 from each pair to DonorsChoose.org. They are very charitable, and in every partnership they do, they donate proceeds of their revenue. But they did something really, really smart. Instead of writing us a check at the end of the partnership for kind of a lump sum of the money that they raised for us, they took the $30, they created a gift card, and they put the gift card in the eyeglasses case. So every single customer that bought a pair could then go onto our site and actually pick the project that they care about funding. And then the customer gets the feedback. So it's great, obviously, for a company like Warby Parker to do this. Like, they're really putting the choice in their customers' hands. We've had other companies who've done this and seen a real improvement in sales when they allow their customers to allocate their charitable donations. And for us, it's great because we're hopefully exposing a bunch of people to something that they want to keep doing, which is funding a project on our site. And we have the $55 million that I mentioned that comes from corporate partnerships every year. Most of them are structured in a sort of co-branded partnership way, where the companies are exposing their employees or their customers to projects on our site. And then this is one that I think everybody in the room understands. It's a little hard for me to understand why this is like so critical as a charity to have endorsements from recognizable names. Stephen Colbert is on our national board of directors and is one of our hardest working board members and has been since 2008. When people like Stephen Colbert or influential bloggers or artists talk about our site and encourage people to donate, we get a ton of donations from it. The endorsement piece is, it's not the A-list Hollywood celebrity whose name you would recognize, whose name everyone in the room would recognize, that is able to mobilize people to fund projects on our site, because we've had them and they don't. The more niche, so this is Sarah Bunting, right? When you go on her blog, every time she posts, she gets hundreds of comments. fun projects on Donors Choose, she'll get hundreds of people donating within minutes of her posting a blog post, and none of you have ever heard of her. Stephen Colbert now is really famous because he does The Late Show, but back in the day in 2007 when he was doing the Colbert Report and he wasn't that famous, he would encourage his viewers to support classroom projects, and it would crash our site and we'd raise, $250,000 with our site like halfway stable. So that's we found the key is to find people who really care about what we do. Maybe they have a public school teacher in their family, and they have a really engaged audience like that. And finally, we really use our teachers as ambassadors of our site. So up until a couple of years ago, we thought of teachers strictly as our beneficiaries, as the people our job is to serve. And we never talked to them about fundraising for their classroom projects, because that was our job to do that. And we ended up randomly building this feature on our site where donors could leave a comment for the classroom after they made a donation saying why they gave. And we started looking through those comments and saw that so many people knew the teacher they were donating to. So the comments would say, I'm supporting my daughter who teaches this classroom, or this is one of my best friends from college I gave because I care about her. And we had this crazy aha moment of our teachers are already fundraising. They want to help get their projects funded, and we are doing nothing to help them at all. So a couple years ago, we started doing things like we created a unique landing page for each teacher. So every teacher has all their projects on what we call their teacher page. We added what we call Facebook Connect. I think it's now Facebook Open Graph. I can't keep up with what Facebook calls it, but teachers can connect their Facebook account to their DonorsChoose.org teacher account, and every time they post a project or they get a donation, we'll put that up on their Facebook wall. That feature alone this year will drive about $2.5 million in classroom projects. By comparison, if we ask people to do something on Facebook, we get no money. It's all about social proof, as you know. And then the final thing we do is when we can raise funds for this, for the first week a teacher's project is live, we'll give them a promo code that they can share with their networks that matches up to $100 in donations towards their projects. That was about 3 years ago we started doing that. Today, half of our donors who come to our website are friends of teachers, and half of our teachers are fundraising. So unlike some other for-profit crowdfunding sites, we'll never force our teachers to fundraise. We still raise the bulk of the money going to projects, but we give them tools if they want to use them, and half of the donors are coming from them. And then, so getting donors is in some ways the hard part, but getting donors to come back and give again, despite this amazing philanthropic experience we give them, we think, is still really hard. Only 1 in 5 of our donors comes back and gives a second time. And if you think about it on the scale of considered purchase to impulse purchase, making a charitable donation is not even on that scale. It's somewhere else. It's out of the kindness of your heart. You don't get anything for it. It's this whole other scale. I should create a scale for it. But really, in order to get someone to come back, you have to give them a really good reason. You have to tell a really good story. You have to tug at their heartstrings. You can't just say, hey guys, we have a good philanthropic experience. So for us, a ton of getting them to come back once we've gotten them is storytelling, and the main way we do that is through email. I'm going to share, I've got a couple of probably 4 or 5 ways that are our key drivers in bringing donors back. The key one is email, which I'll talk about in a minute. The first is these student thank you notes. So for donors that give $50 and give us their mailing address, $50 or more, we actually collect handwritten student thank you notes from the kids that got the dictionaries that you funded. The teachers ship them to our office. We go through them, ship them back out to the donors. And we'll send out about 80,000 of those this school year. And every time we send out a package like this, we get $41 in increase in lifetime value of that donor. And like this one, thank you for letting us go to the aquarium. I had fun. My favorite part was the divers, snakes, and alligators. And then, like, if you look up at the top, I don't even know what that asterisk is. I guess it's the teacher maybe making a note that Ben has a broken arm. So you get these notes, and they're either funny or they'll make you cry. Like, some of them are just so, like, the amount of gratitude kids can show is so unbelievable that people are just really, we don't ask them to give again when we send them these. They just come back on our site and give again. The other thing we do is we actually have staff handwrite thank you notes to donors. When we try to do it within a week of their donation. Those student thank you packages can take sometimes up to a couple of months to get back to the donor. And we basically did a test where we took 6,000 donors within a week of their first donation. We wrote thank you notes to half, we didn't to the other half, and found that that the donors who received them, their lifetime value went up by $10 each. And this was something I had to, we're a very like techie organization, so I had to really convince my CEO that we should actually allocate like manual labor to handwriting thank you notes. But once we did that test, it was a pretty easy decision. We'll send out about 15,000 of them this year, and we've done a lot of studying of data to figure out who the people are that are most receptive to receiving them. We've debated and looked into like getting a mechanical arm to write more of them, and have just like found that we think it's just most compelling when we have volunteers and staff people write them. So hopefully one day we'll figure out how to get from 15,000 to 500,000, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Subscription giving is a big one for us. We have this basically upsell somewhere in our checkout flow, and we ask people to give every month. I think maybe 1% of people that go through the flow do it, but once a month it's really exciting when you see those numbers hit your classroom projects. And then email marketing is the biggest one. So email allows us to tell that story to bring somebody to come back to our website and give again. This is a donation receipt. You can see we just try to do a lot of like fun, personable things in our email. This is the example of the feedback loop. So for everyone who donates, whether they give $1 or a lot more than that, they're going to see the classroom like the actual kids using the materials they purchased. So this was a donation I made towards a theater production, and it was actually, the donation was for the actual material that made the stage for the kids. Then we do a recommendation engine. So I was telling Steve that in our dream we would be as good at recommending classroom projects as Netflix is recommending you TV shows, or Amazon is at recommending like that thing you didn't know you needed that accompanies your purchase perfectly. I think we have a long way to go, but we take everything we have about a donor, their zip code, anything they've searched for. So if I had searched for theater production or theater costumes, once a month, we send an email out to the donors that has a project down the street from their home, and for anything they searched for on our site. And since we have between 30 and 40,000 projects waiting for funding at any given time, we have a pretty long tail that makes this email like what we call nutritious. This will raise $250,000 once a month every time we send it. We have a lot of fights internally about how often we should send it. I feel like once a month is enough, but some people think we should be sending it every week. I think we're going to test that this coming school year. Basically, if we have very little information on somebody, that's the baseline here. If we have their zip code and we can send them a project down the street from where they live, we have a 6x conversion over if we don't have their zip code. And then for us, the holy grail is like theater costumes plus zip code. It's hitting someone's interest down the street from their home. And then one last email campaign to share, and I'll wrap it up. So for us, sending like a classroom project that someone cares about is the most important thing to get them to come back. But we had a little bit of fun this Valentine's Day, and we realized that we had basically, like, we had a couple of staff people with unusual last names who had found teachers with their own last names on our site. And we had read Adam Alter, who's an NYU Stern marketing psychology professor. We had read his book where he did a huge study, and he found out that people are more likely to give to support natural disasters and hurricanes that share the first initial of their name. So I'm more likely to give to Hurricane Katie or Hurricane Kathy or Hurricane Catherine than I am to Hurricane Steve. And so basically what we did is we said, roses are red, violets are blue, give to a teacher with the same last name as you. And we matched our donors up to a teacher with our last name. And even though that wasn't like technically, like the project wasn't near their home or it wasn't in the area they cared about, we've gotten one of the highest conversion rates on this than any other email. And I just wanted to close with a couple of comments that we saw donors leave teachers from this email. So yeah, this is basically, the theme of this one was like fun with personalization. And we're trying now to think of other ways we can do this sort of like fun once a year email campaign to our donors. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, thanks.
I had one question about personalization. Since that's one of the things a lot of these technologies are working towards. Can you tell me about some of your own learnings, or some of your learnings about personalization, how you're implementing it, and what sorts of results you see from it?
Sure. So just so you know, like on our stack, we use the Salesforce Marketing Cloud for our email, but we also have built a lot of our personalization on our own site, like in-house. I do think there are so many great services out there for the type of stuff we do that you saw in email. Mostly it's just us kind of like sweating it out and pulling together the largest spreadsheet ever for donors' last names and teachers' last names. But in terms of that, we just know that it is the most important thing we do to get someone they care about. And we've actually trained our donors. This has become this total, almost like a surprise to us in the last 12 months, and it's almost like a good problem to have. If we send someone who lives in Chicago and cares about literacy a math project in Detroit, they send us an angry note back saying, you know I care about literacy, you know I live in Chicago, why are you sending me a project in Detroit? So I think we're starting to be held to the same standard as like the holy grail of Netflix and Amazon, which is something we're partly proud of, but partly like, but that math project in Detroit is still really important and cute. So one thing I was telling Steve that we're thinking about doing, and we started work on, is making our return homepage an actual listing of projects that donor will care about. And we'd obviously do it on mobile too, but taking all our lessons from email and actually putting them in and making our site nothing but projects that a donor would care about.
So if you're going to do personalization, you better do it right, because it sort of raises the bar of consumer expectations.
Yes, you better use the data you have for them, and you better get it right. Yeah.
Anybody have any questions for Katie? Yep. And please, when you have a question, stand, tell us your name and who you're with.
Okay. Donna Hamilton, I'm with Alliant, and we're a data analytics company. So I'm just curious about when you use the data in the emails where it says affinity plus zip, and that's the best in performance, have you looked at additional sources to help qualify the audience, even just simply demographics or lifestyle that might tell you at what stage the donor is, because you might be able to message to them differently?
Yeah, and you're talking about our existing donors who've already made a donation?
Yeah, right? Even just to better target them, because you say 1 out of 5 ends up donating again, right? So
yeah.
You want a better conversion on those efforts.
Yeah, so we have tried so many different ways of looking at our donors to see what project is going to be the most effective in getting them to come back. And we've literally found that their search plus their zip is the most powerful. That's the best data we have, I guess, which is probably why I shared it. I do think that we could do a whole lot more work around when is the best time to email a donor, how soon after their first donation should we ask them something again. We know that we have donors who only give at the holidays, and we email them the rest of the year. so I think there's a whole lot more we can do to optimize, like on that foundation of zip code plus what they care about.
You allow users to customize their experiences. What's been your experience with how much users really want to customize for themselves, and how much you sort of have to drive this?
Yeah, you know, that's such a good question, and we used to have on our homepage basically a link to then go to our search page, and we had all of these filters on the left-hand side. So you can search by subject area, grade level, poverty level of the classroom, how long the project's been on our site. The list is endless, and we found that very few people use those. It was only our most engaged donors that would go in and dig around and play around with those filters. So we then added, on our actual homepage, we ask you where you live, and then we give you a prompt for either your zip code or a subject area you care about. And so you type that in to get to search. And so when you arrive at search, you've already basically like designated what it is you care about. So I still think we could do more with that. Like the thing that the thing we think about all the time is like, how do you serendipitously get someone to tell you what they care about? So I love to do yoga, but DonorsChoose doesn't know that and wouldn't think to ask me, like, what do you do in the morning at 7 a.m.? But like, yeah, how could we get someone's favorite author or favorite childhood book that they read in school, or their favorite, maybe even their alma mater, and connect them to a teacher with that same alma mater. So we're basically like evoking at least one thing out of them to get them onto the search page on something they care about. But I'm always open to any ideas or brainstorms people have around getting people to like eliciting people's interest area or hobby on our site.
Let me ask you a question that's going to come up later about all marketers being besieged by vendors in the space, in the marketing tech space. How do you go about the process of evaluating, vetting, simply making the process manageable?
Well, I love talking to vendors because so many times that's where we get really good ideas for new technologies that are coming down the pike. My team talks to a whole lot. We also talk to a lot of peers in the industry, but we like to know what the cutting edge thing is. The thing that I have that probably most of you don't have is no budget. So it's really easy to end a conversation if it doesn't make sense for us, and that I just can tell them that we don't have money for it. So my vetting process is probably a little easier than most.
Katie Bisbee, thank you very much, and thank you very much for stepping in out of turn. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
If you could all bear with us 1 second, we think we have our panel all set. We think the train's finally got here. If you could bear. And also we have, as we move towards marketing technology, we have the lessons of 6 or 7 years of the siege of ad tech to inform it. So understanding the ways in which the technology is being vetted and evaluated, and the ways in which the tech is being mapped against business outcomes and goals is one of the things that we wanted to take up in this first panel. To take the lead on this panel, we have our own editor-in-chief, Joe Mandizzi. He oversees all content at MediaPost. Joe's been covering especially the agency world since the late 1970s, early 1980s. Please welcome our editor-in-chief, Joe Mandizzi.
Hi. Well, hello everybody, and thanks for being patient about the start of this panel. The machines I'm waiting for are the self-driving trains that will overcome snafus when there are explosions and fires in Harlem. But I didn't hear Steve's opening remarks, but you understand the thesis of the day here. I'll sit down in a minute after I do the intros. But the idea here is, are we really shifting from one world to another? What is marketing tech really having a transformational effect on the way media and advertising work and the way we think about it? And we have a very esteemed panel here of knowledgeable executives. What I'll do is I'll actually just ask them each to introduce themselves, so that way I don't fumble it, make sure I didn't get this slide right, matched up on the screen there, because sometimes the seating is wrong. So why don't you do this and say, introduce yourself, explain what your role in your organization is, and just answer this general opening thesis question is marketing tech subsuming ad tech, and are we transitioning to something else?
So welcome everyone. I'm Christopher Biro. I'm with a company called FlexJet. We provide private jets through fractional leases and jet cards. I would say to take on this question, Joe, I would say yes. And I think that as we are consumed with data and just looking at all the stack that's out there, we're losing an important element, which is really that emotional marketing and really being able to look at how you can connect with your target and really how you can connect with your audience. So I would say yes, that we're going to retreat back to more of an emotional marketing persistence.
Cool. So actually we'll become more human, not more machine.
The trains will be on time.
There you go. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Josh Kemp. I'm a director with Sapient Nitro, actually based here in New York. My focus within the organization is really on retail and consumer electronics, working with clients on e-commerce and digital marketing platforms. To answer the question, I agree that it's getting subsumed a bit, but I actually think while it is a bit of a retreat from an emotional marketing perspective, I actually think that there is a tremendous opportunity in that and how we leverage the data to make those emotional opportunities more engaging and actually much more tightly targeted. And I think ultimately it plays out into a pretty good story.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brent Shedd. I run J. Walter Thompson on the West Coast. And we have luxury clients, we have technology clients, consumer clients. Relative to the question, I think marketing tech is trying to keep up with the balance of control that is moving into the consumers. And as the consumers start to take more control over what they want to see and what they don't want to see, they're voting with their clicks and they're voting with their eyeballs, and they're wresting control away from the advertisers. So I think like what Chris said is real, that if you're not able to touch the consumer with a relevant emotional pull that brings them into the message, you'll lose them no matter how many times you annoy them with emails and text messages and everything else.
Thank you.
I'm Balin Springer. I lead the marketing analytics practice for R2C Group in Portland, Oregon. I actually grew up in digital and worked in automotive in Detroit running digital media analytics, and have since transitioned over and really starting now to bring some of that digital accountability to quantifying and optimizing some more traditional channels. But as an analytics guy, I'm completely emotionless. So I can't really speak to that component, but there's obviously an arms race for data and technology around that, which I think is consuming all these pieces. But I think it also has to be put in check by the emotional side of things, and putting a good I guess more qualitative view on things from a strategy perspective.
Okay. Well, so I think it's interesting. All of the intros here went back to the human qualities, the emotions, with the exception of Balin. But I noticed that your agency's position is about craft and science, not art and science per se. And I think it's the same idea, which is, you can't throw the human thinking, intuition out with the machine logic, right? So the second question I had was kind of where are we in this? Well, do you agree with this progression? Everybody said, yeah, there is kind of a change going on here, but I don't think I got a sense for where we are in the change and how far out of it will come. Do you think this is a progression, a revolution, an evolution, or some other word? And that's kind of a jump ball question. Are we at the beginning of a tipping point, or is this kind of like a process we keep going through perpetually in this industry, which is balancing art and science, math and intuition, machine and human? Anybody can jump in on that one.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. I have the longest title up here, so I feel like I have to pull more than my weight. But no, I think technology is stepping in to actually help the relevance issue with consumers, because by being able to track more of what a consumer does, where they go, where they are, what their mindset is, we're trying to use that to deliver messages to them that are more relevant to what they're doing right now to achieve breakthrough, right? And a lot of people view that as creepy and intrusive and everything else, but it's only intrusive if it's, I'm going to use this phrase loosely, if it's advertising instead of information, right? If I'm actually in the market for a car, maybe a Lexus or something, not a J. Walter Thompson brand, by the way, then seeing a Lexus advertisement to me is actually information because it's relevant to me right now. 6 months from now, after I've already bought my Lexus, I don't want to see the Lexus advertisement anymore. So then it's an advertisement. So the more we can use marketing tech to actually figure out who you are and what you're interested in and what you're doing right now so that we can deliver a message to you that is non-competitive, meaning it's not, I'm not seeing 800 messages at the same time, but I'm getting something that's actually relevant to what I'm thinking of right now, then I appreciate it and you're helping me. And I think that's where marketing tech plays a role in the digital space.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that. I think that right now what is happening is we're, as marketers, and we try to move towards becoming master marketers, is really taking a survey of our stack at the moment. And all this technology, especially in the last 48 months to essentially 5 years, has overwhelmed a lot of marketing groups. And what they are now doing is getting an opportunity to take a look at their measurement and their analytics to see what works and what doesn't work. And I think we've all been victims of credit card promotions, and you get the same credit card promotion every single month, or you get the credit card promotion that essentially you already have it in your wallet, so to speak. So looking at big data and looking at surveying your stack, I think is a really important thing right now, and is part of the marketing mix as people plan.
Okay, we'll come back to the where are we in the cycle question in a little while, but I think this is really an important theme. We had a conference here in this place yesterday on programmatic, which is an extension of this evolution of technology. And one of the interesting insights for me was that the theory that programmatic has driven down the cost of acquiring advertising and audience impressions. And instead of the industry putting that money towards making other forms of marketing more effective or putting it to the bottom line for marketers, what they've done is they've bought more impressions. And what they've done is they've increased the frequency. And I'm not singling out anybody. This is the thesis that the cost savings from programmatic have been put back into buying more impressions, right? But the problem is it's created an even more inferior user experience because people are being retargeted. They are getting those car ads over and over again, and probably not jet ads, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But the point is it's actually worked in the wrong way. So, I mean,
yeah, I think that actually goes to a little bit of the point of where we are in the cycle, right? You made the point that this is a very kind of consumer or customer-driven push into the ineffectiveness of the impressions that we're seeing and voting with clicks. And I think what we're seeing is a reaction of programmatic's great, I can get more impressions out there so I can get those clicks back. And I think the more we see that strategy play out, we're going to see the customers continuing to vote with those clicks and continuing to make it rise back up in cost structure so that you eliminate the savings from programmatic. And that's what could turn it into what would be an excellent evolution in how we approach marketing to much more of a revolution where it's just outright rejected by the customers. Today, if I'm shopping for a Lexus and you show me an ad for a Ford, you've just lost, right? And that does happen. I unfortunately do, when I'm car shopping, do see completely different classes of cars. Happen to be a pilot, and I do get ads, not from FlexJet, but for private jets, that's not what I'm looking at. That's a poor targeting. It seems superficially like, hey, good, we hit a pilot, but we didn't hit a pilot who's remotely close to affording a citation private jet, and that's where I think we'll start to see it become more of a revolution.
Okay, all right. So this leads to one of the things we're trying to examine here today, which is the shift from inputs to outputs. One of the problems with that programmatic scenario, and I'm just using that as an entry point into the bigger MarTech conversation, is that the people who manage that process are compensated, rewarded on the idea of buying more impressions. It's the programmatic agencies, the trading desk, the media buying departments, or the client-side equivalent. So their incentives are, wow, this is great, I can buy cheaper inputs, I'm going to buy more of them. But the problem, and maybe this is a question for you, Chris, because you're on top of all of it, is who's course correcting that to say, no, we really care about the user experience. I know no agency wants to put it to the bottom line, but how do you deal with that?
Well, I would say, you know, the analogy that I always use is it's like when you go to a party and you are introduced to a person that you've already met. And of course, they go through the whole spiel and introduce themselves to you. You know, it's almost offensive or disrespectful. So with that being said, it's, you know, we are all consumed with looking at the data and of course looking at all the digital tools that we have, but you really need to drive digital discipline, as I say. And that immediately starts with making sure as a marketer, especially when you're looking at the data, that ultimately you start with the concert of the content. So it really is the message and looking at not only yourself but competitors on how that message is going to be distributed, how it's going to be consumed, and how is it going to be relevant to essentially drive ROI, especially with budgets that are always, you know, less than they should be. Driving that efficiency and really driving that relevance of the message before you start to look at the data. It actually in my industry is very much important. I'm a challenger brand, so you know we have to make the right moves at the right time. So that being said, I think that data is very extremely important. The tools are extremely important to have, and you want to be on that cutting edge, but you also want to make sure that you've got your message in order first before you look at that data.
And I think, Joe, if I could add on to that. So we have a lot of technology clients, very big ones. And I think the availability of data is a double-edged sword, right? So a lot of our clients have terabytes of data coming in from their digital advertising and emails, et cetera. So they know what's happening, and too often they default to what I call the spray and pray approach, which is exactly that. Buy more impressions with the advertising. And the reason why is they know what people are doing, but they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know what caused the actual purchase to happen. So since they don't know, it's like, well, then hit them all and hit them again until they buy, right? So it's that what I call forensic analysis that isn't happening. And I'm not accusing my fellow panelists here, but too often the data and analytics teams at companies are more involved in just reporting, right? They roll up and they say, okay, here are the quarterly results. This is how many people clicked. This is how many people bought. And the marketing directors are the ones that are at fault for not saying, okay, that's great. Why did they buy? What caused that to happen? And generally, if they ask that question, they get blank stares. Like, I don't know, that's not my job. Like, I don't know who's reading between the lines on this one. So that I think just in general is a fault in the system that has to be addressed, or else we will continue to slide down this.
And if I might add to that, I think what happens is that, you know, of course I'm on the client side, is that marketers, what they tend to do is allow the data make the decisions for them. And the data is really great at looking at, from a measurement perspective of what happened, but it's really looking at not only the past, but looking at the present on how you can project and use that data from an analytics perspective to project what's going to happen with your competitors and in the market. And I think you know, we're always strapped for time, but essentially looking at what is going to happen based on data trends. And really then being able to take that and thinking from an innovative standpoint, how can I actually use this so that it is, again, relevant to the particular target that I have. So it really is more or less moving forward without looking in the rearview mirror, but really looking at what's going to happen 3-4 quarters down the line based on the data and analysis.
Yeah, and I think I think you both make good points, and part of my emotionless pitch when we're talking to clients is, you know, like, we're truly just looking at the quantitative component, and it's really important for us to engage, you know, with our media planning and buying counterparts to understand, like, all right, here's what is happening, here's why we think it's why, and maybe even more importantly, you know, what is feasible to act upon and do more or less of, and, you know, to make sure that it's, you know, because part of, I think, of your premise is like directly tied to the title here about the strategy, not the stack, and about, you know, like, some of what you suggested feels like just letting the machines run blindly and not really having a cohesive strategy around to guide the machines, and not having, you know, maybe some resources in charge to help, ask these questions and not just like plug it in the machine and let it run. So,
yeah. So I think there's two themes going on here. One is the automation set in play, and the other is, are we even looking at the right data and looking at the right inputs and outputs? So I want to break it down. And I want to talk, because you kind of raised that issue about automation. So I've spent some time in the last few years studying trading desks. I hate to keep going back to programmatic, but it's what I've followed most closely. I'm less knowledgeable about marketing technologies, but I'm learning fast. But one of the interesting things is when I go into the trading desk, they would say to me, it's not about algorithms. What we like to do is turn the algos off and watch the market behavior. We're traders. We're using our best human insights. We let the machines assist us in processing huge volumes of data to tell us which markets are popping and which kinds of creative are yielding or whatever, but it's still a human judgment. And to me, that is exactly the right way you should be doing it, whether it's programmatic or measuring e-commerce or lead gen or any of the things you're looking at. So when I was speaking to you in preparation, Chris, you mentioned this idea that it's really about the dashboard and people being able to visualize the data and make human decisions. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how it's changed over the last few years as you've been able to look at how more of the pieces are working together?
Yeah, I would say dashboards really serve two purposes, which is how are we going to get more funding and budget, and essentially how are we going to justify our ROI. And looking at dashboards on a daily basis, though, is very helpful. And I think from the client side, as I've sat across from hundreds of pitches in my career, data analytics companies and agencies are typically coming in with the next wow bang tool that essentially is going to enhance your dashboard. And as the client, of course, you don't want to look foolish, so you agree, but really don't have the knowledge of really what they're talking about. So how is that relevant? How is the dashboard actually relevant to, again, your business? How it's relevant to your competitive capture is extremely important, and how it's going to essentially help you drive that efficiencies, reduce the redundancies, and what have you. The key for me with the dashboards is what's the overall health? What is all of these analytics, all of these particular numbers mean at the end of the day? And again, how is it going to be relevant to my content calendar or my marketing plan that I have? That's extremely important. So what we do is we actually run projections against our particular marketing campaigns based on what our dashboards tell us. And we are so bold as to look at, a few quarters from now or 2 quarters from now, what is that dashboard going to look like? And this is a very difficult thing to do with marketers because they do not want to project essentially what their bonuses are going to be. So it's very uncomfortable. But you look at that dashboard and you essentially, in short, look at what it's going to be in Q3 of 2017. And that dashboard then allows us to frame up their individual goals, look at our measurement to make sure that we are tracking the correct things and really being able to contribute to our ROI. So I think using dashboards other than just reporting or, again, justifying your budget or justifying your relevance at that particular company is what we all need to do as marketers to advance our overall objectives.
So in doing that, has it changed your mix at all? Has it changed the way you think about how pieces, the ability to look at all those things simultaneously, has it affected the way you do things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, it's given us springboards as we have what we call development days in our group. When we're sitting down and looking at what those marketing messages are and driving that consistency of content, it really has helped with that. But it's also helped us as we talk to our partners. One of the questions was before you arrived, which was, how do you work with vendors? Well, what we try to do is we try to advance vendors to partners. And when you take that dashboard and you have the analytics and you have the data, that really allows you to have the true discussions along with those particular vendors to really move them to the realm of, are they going to become partners? So it's helped us incredibly drive a lot of efficiencies, and it helped us obtain our goals and really has added to the bottom line as far as sales goes.
Okay. So the second part of that question was, are we even capturing, measuring, and looking at the right data as inputs to measure the outputs we want? And you already talked about how there's ridiculous volumes of big data available today, but are we looking at the right data? So one of the reasons we're so reliant on media is because we have great metrics and measurements to measure these things. But maybe, some media we don't buy as much of because we don't have the data available for it. So my question for you is, are we even measuring the right things, and do we have the right inputs to even begin to understand what outputs we can manage?
So I think that's an interesting question. I think the question of are we looking at the right data or the right measurements comes back to are we organizing ourselves in the correct kind of measurement culture? And are we actually looking as a business and as marketers, are we looking at it and saying our measurements and our KPIs align to what the business cares about, right? And then once we've done that, then the data exists. There is this wealth of data out there, and the immediate reaction has been to go do programmatic, automate some things, and that's all great. But actually, that's not the real value of the data. The data is in the analysis of it. But the analysis is useless if you don't know what you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve. And I think what the clients need to do is come to us with, here's what I care about. That's all your responsibility is. I care about new customer acquisition. I care about recurring customers. I care about leads funneled into the sales team, right? That's the KPI you've got to align yourselves around, and then put the onus on your agency and on your technology partners to say, here's how we'll help you with that. And here's how you'll actively be able to measure that. And then as you start to get that measurement, you may not like what you first see, but then you can start to take that and determine strategies and action plans of how you're going to act on the data against the KPIs that you fundamentally have aligned with your business and your business partners.
I think that's exactly right. So what I see in a lot of our clients, even very sophisticated clients, is they lack a measurement plan, period. Like, it's too much of a pain to put together, or they don't know, they haven't asked those questions of exactly what are we tracking. And I think both the benefit of the digital space is the ability to test and learn. And I think if clients looked at their own business and said, you know what am I going to learn this year? And if I'm not smarter at the end of this year from a marketing perspective that's going to help me get more efficient and use my spend better, then I've failed my own business. Like, I need to be held accountable for this. And putting that question to the agencies are always welcome to or willing to answer that question, but it should be a partnership with the clients, right? Because there's no use in measuring and analyzing benchmarks and things that leave the client saying, so what?
Yeah, just one point on this. I would say that the hardest marketing campaign in the world to pitch is internally. And I think when you have that measurement in place, it really does allow you then to identify what your issues and problems are within your business and how you can really improve. So it's a very exciting time, frankly, because that allows you to go into the stakeholders, internal stakeholders on the client side, and be able to pitch campaigns that normally wouldn't get the green light, simply because you've got the analytics and the data to back that up, and you've got the tools to be able to support that you're going to achieve your goals. So it's actually easier now to pitch campaigns that might be off the path, so to speak, simply because you've got measurement in place.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but you tee up an obvious question. So do you have a good example of a campaign that would not have seemed that obvious to you if you hadn't seen the analytics?
Yeah, so in my world of private jets, my target is essentially 55 to dead, which is very difficult to try to, from a digital perspective, to market to executives. The truth of the matter is that the people that I'm marketing to have a disposable income of about $5 million a month.
So I fit 2-year parameters, but not the same.
Yeah. So anyhow, where this is all going is that, so when you are pitching any digital technology and you have all the analytics in the world, it's very difficult when you're looking at, pitching people who have people that essentially check their emails and what have you, and ultimately are what we call the stealth wealth. So these are the 1%ers of the 1%ers. So I'm a little bit, in a different category. But one of the things that, from a case study perspective, that we wanted to bring was an app. And so part of our business that we have is a company called Skyjet, which is a charter company. And what we needed to do was bring this app to essentially a target that doesn't necessarily is not digitally savvy. And so the analytics and the data that we had at this particular point, based through outbound email campaigns and direct campaigns, suggested the fact that actually it was their assistants that were doing most of the booking for the travel. So actually our target that we had based on analytics wasn't the actual people, it was the gatekeepers. And so we launched this app, and it had extreme success. And we really realized through the data that that this app also was more of a survey tool for a particular demo, and that they would go in and they would actually look at the trips that were booked. So this is a great example of us looking at the data and the analytics and discovering something that essentially we didn't know based on big data, based on our tools and feedbacks that we had in a very short amount of time.
That's pretty smart. You came up with a personal digital assistant for the personal assistant. That's your target. Great example. So one of the themes here too is about the focus on strategy. And so analytics and data have always been important to that, and it's just a function of how good the optics and the data were that we had. So we went, in my mind, from an evolution from integrated marketing communications to marketing mix models, which began to using regression models to look at the past and predict the future. But now as data and media access have sped up, we're now in this world of attribution. Now we're in a world of fractional attribution, of multi-device attribution. So as things speed up and as data flows more, my question is, are we actually getting to a more strategic view of the mix, or are we just getting faster and faster about optimizing those inputs?
So I think we're getting to a point where it's like we're inundated with data, right? So we talk about how great it is. It's great for any number of reasons. And to me, this comes back to the reason we're not leveraging the data the way we should today is there's a whole lot of work that has to be done with organizations before you can actually leverage that data. You have to organize, you have to reorganize and align yourselves across channels, which means, digital, print, television, whatever channels you're in, realign that so that you are across. You need to really start thinking about how do you measure yourselves all along the same metrics. And I think from that, you'll start thinking about the stack, which again, the stack is the bottom layer here, but it's dependent upon this strategy. And the strategy is a marketing strategy, it is a technology strategy. But to do that, you have to be working together and you have to remove some of those silos. When you get there, you process decisions. The problem is that tool may sit in a silo in somebody's office across the hall or across the street or across the country, and you're not talking together. And I think that to me, when we talk about it's the strategy and not the stack, fundamentally, the hardest part of this is how do you look at your organization, look at what your organization values, and then align yourselves as a team to start attacking that.
Yeah, I would always say that also too, it's always great when you have new management that comes in because they look at the tools and then they say, we need a different provider that does the exact same thing. And so you end up spending 6 months looking at different tools and having debates about essentially the same thing. So I think it's really important for against suppliers, partners, and vendors, essentially, to constantly be front and center to educate the clients on what the enhancements are and the reasons why those tools are so important, because it really does help the actual brand so that they're not in a sourcing, competition for 6 months, essentially sourcing the same tool.
I actually just want to support that one point for a moment because one of the things that we find is a lot of our clients, they go out, they pick up an email marketing tool, and they start using it right away, which is phenomenal. Let's get some value out of that thing. And they completely skip the step that the tool they just bought, that company would love to come in, give you a little bit of training, show you how it works, so you can start utilizing it fully. They don't take that opportunity. And then when they call us up in 5 months, they're like, we just saw this shiny new thing on the LumaScape diagram, and it's going to do what we need it to do. And we bought it. We're like, okay. And like, well, we want you to integrate it to our email marketing tool. Okay. You know the email marketing tool does that. Why did you buy it? And they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to get into it. And I think as agencies, we need to do a better job of this as well. But education on the tools you own is probably the best path to not getting so focused on shiny objects that come out within the stack. It's phenomenal, the capability that exists out there. Knowing what you have is probably one of the #1 things that is easy to fix, and you should do right away.
The only thing I would add to that is don't overestimate your internal capabilities. We've seen so many clients that have tried to install Salesforce, Oracle, whatever, and they've got an IT guy internally going, I got this, I can totally do this. That guy doesn't know what he's doing, and when he misinstalls or completely botches your Salesforce install, it creates a cluster that it just becomes enormous, right? And now you've got this expensive tool that you're paying for, and now you've got to bring in specialized consultants to try and untangle this horrendous world that he has created with botched reporting and everything else. And the data is worthless to the agencies because we can't pull anything out of it. It's all incorrect. It's absolutely worthless. So it's worth using the actual company that you bought the tool from to properly install the tool, even at additional cost, so it actually works.
Yeah, amen to that. I would say definitely, the two hardest departments in a company, to spell their names is IT and HR. And I got to tell you, it is just a pain when the HR stakeholders do come into the room, and because they are IT, are able to give a point of view. And they've got a lot of voice, actually, in the conversation, simply because they control all the back-end hardware and systems. So I would say that, for people on the client side and even the agencies to encourage their clients really to have that kickoff meeting. It seems a little 101, but to make sure that you're identifying the stakeholders and identifying the data sources as well as identifying the stack, so that when you are in the middle of the campaign, you're not essentially switching streams. And this happens, I would say, 9 times out of 10, and really can delay a campaign and delay the effectiveness of a campaign.
I think there's a bit of a misconception too about either one platform or being able to set up your technology stack across a lot of platforms that is just going to completely automate and give you cross-channel, cross-device, and there's a silver bullet either in one place or through a connection of pieces. And to echo some of what these guys are saying, it's like, I certainly haven't seen that exist. And making sure that you can leverage and understand the tools that you do have in place, and then I think you do almost have to use them somewhat independently still to say, all right, there may still be some value to a media mix model at a certain point to achieve this very particular objective around strategic planning, and then we also need to use this other tool for some fractional attribution to optimize the hell out of the digital space, and we may need to do some other things here, and really focusing on getting some of those pieces right before it just immediately jumps to I see people running through the halls of organizations all the time screaming integrate, and no one really even knows what that means.
Sorry. Well, what I was, again, on that point, I would say that essentially getting your IT department, getting your media agency, getting also your digital agency in the same room is very, very important, along with your analytics company, simply to make sure that you're all on the same page, because you will not become aligned if you really don't get them at the same table.
We'll throw it to audience in a minute, but I do want to do one follow-up question, because I think, Josh, that was a keen insight there. And in the old days, we would have called that media neutrality, which is you don't get hung up on the hard-on, excuse my language, that you have for this medium. Think about how it works in the total mix, the total strategy, and for the user. So one of the problems I see with any of these things, whether they were marketing mix models in the old days that were designed for CPG companies, or cloud marketing clouds, I don't want to name any names because they might be sponsoring this, but who started with email lists, and they optimized the crap out of email lists, and then they extended that into the next widgets they could touch. is it's not really a holistic way for a brand, a marketer, or even a consumer to look at the world, but they've done a great job at optimizing this component. So I don't know what the solution is to that. I always look at it like it should be more like the airline industry, not your segment, but like yield optimization. Like, you know, you do these 3 or 4 or 5 things, which one gets the best return, which is what mixed modeling was supposed to be. But we're now in an era, you do have all this data, and you could see where things are starting to move. How come we're not doing that now? How come we always start like with this route of email or search or display, and then, you know?
So I think it's hard. That's one reason why a lot of organizations are doing it that way. I do think I think it's very possible. We have a client who, I guess it was last year, the CEO started a customer experience task force. And on that task force, he picked somebody from product, somebody from brand, somebody from digital marketing, somebody from what they consider traditional marketing. HR was on there, legal was on there, IT was on there. Every group you can imagine was in that room. Probably janitorial staff was there. They were all aligned to the same KPIs that he set for success. And some of those KPIs were, did you show up to a meeting on time, right? But ultimately, because the entire team was being judged on the same KPIs, they had the same motivations. Right. There was not going to be, well, IT saved the day because we reduced infrastructure costs by 10%. Hell no, we don't care. What we care about is that the Customer Experience Task Force drives these results in terms of satisfaction, brand perception level, these types of things, and that keeps people focused on what is the outcome, not the what did I do to get my department one-upped here. And I think that's where you begin with breaking down silos. I think it's impossible to walk into a reasonably sized organization and say, hey, today we're all going to be one team together and we're all going to have the same KPI. I think you do have to start that with smaller initiatives, demonstrate that it works. It's the same as a campaign, right? It's internal, but you're basically rolling out initiatives saying, this has worked here, now we're going to do it here. We're going to make it a little bit bigger. And before long, you now have an organization that is measurement focused, which allows for testing. I think building that into the mentality across the org is key, but is also singularly aligned to the business outcome and what they can do for it.
Okay, I have a follow-up, but let's turn it over to audience.
They want your follow-up.
There you go. Rob?
Yeah, I'm Paul from the Starcom group. I mean, I've lived and felt every bit of those things. Just there was a Seth Godin email that went around recently talking about data, and there's a line in there that just stuck with me, which is, precision does not automatically equal significance, which gets to the things that Chris and Brent were saying about that you value most precisely what you can measure most precisely, and it isn't always the right thing. Maybe you could just give a couple of questions that you might ask first time, just to make sure, even if it is just what are we trying to do here, before so that we make sure the cart isn't put before the horse.
I mean, frankly, that's probably the question we start at maybe not in a pitch, but if we have a pre-pitch meeting or we're starting a large initiative with a client, what are you trying to achieve? That boils into like an 8-hour conversation then. But the objective is to start unpacking, a top-level KPI. And that's where I went with new customers, right? That's a very simple metric in a way, right? It's also very broad, and it's not going to be the only thing you can measure your business by, because if you have, a million new customers and you're selling $500 handbags and the average order value is $50, you're not doing a good job. But it's at least a single metric that we can all look at and say, okay, we're going to use this as one of our key success criteria. And then we're going to bid out secondary success criteria. But it does, to me, start going to what is the success outcome for this perspective is everything else is supported by the business. If you really think about investment into product, investment into brand, investment into customer experiences that feed both of those, it costs something to do that. And if we're not making the business successful and demonstrating that, how are we going to get continued investment in these other pillars of our organization that are equally important to sustaining the business?
So I would say on that, being on the other side of the table and sitting in front of agencies that go, what is your objective? It's a pretty open question. And I think that following through on essentially a worksheet or a model in really asking 3 specific questions. So what do you want to achieve with your brand? what do you want to achieve with your lead generation, your acquisition plan, and essentially what do you want to do from a loyalty and retention standpoint. And I think if you go through those three components of marketing, that really then forms the question on how do you want to create this digital discipline, or how do you want to create your essentially your digital program. And then from there, talking about the digital program, essentially it is concert of the content, as I say, or aligning your content or your messaging and starting with that. And then essentially moving on to essentially surveying your stack or managing your tools and your data, which is extremely important. And then really the third, competitively, what is your competitive capture? So that is really essentially how I approach it in the simplest form. It's very easy to get off of topic, and of course very easy once you start to look at the data, because it's all on how you frame it up. Overall, I would say that if you take this very simple approach and you keep retreating back to essential questions, it really does help formulate the campaign or the offering that you're looking to give.
The only thing that I would add is there is a benefit to having a third party in that conversation, because they don't have on their back that every other department has. And there's people, it's IT or whether it's marketing or whether it's HR, whatever, they all have what they're getting bonused on. So they're going to bring to that table what is in their best interest, not what's in the company's best interest, right? And what the third party agency or whoever it is, the role that they play in that is what's the right? So if someone's putting something on the table that is not actionable, it doesn't belong on the table. So that's what the third party there is, to make sure that nothing goes on this objectives list that we can't actually achieve or that we can't measure, because if you can't measure it, you never know whether you achieved it. It doesn't belong on the list. So, and they don't have any, no one is pushing them in a direction one way or the other. So they really just have the company's best interests in mind, hopefully, if they're the right third party. And so that can form a more, and it's also true that within these conversations, especially if you've got key stakeholders, there's a power play that happens in this room that the third party is not a participant in, right? So they'll call BS on anybody in that room, whereas no one's going to call BS on the CEO or on the CMO. And the third party has to be able to do that, and you've got to have a frank discussion, because if somebody comes up with, well, we want to increase sales. So if you increase sales by $1, would you be happy? No, that's not what you really mean, right? What do you really mean when you say increase sales? And the more you dig under that level, the more, to your point, it starts to get uncomfortable, because, well, no, I don't know if I want to sign up for, what, 10%? I don't know, 25? I'm looking at the CEO like, guide me here, man. I don't want to sign up for something I can't deliver. That's what this meeting is about, is setting goals that you're going to be held accountable to. And then if you actually say, so 50%, so then the third party's job is to say, can we do 50%? Have we ever done 50%? Is that even achievable? And if it is, how are we going to get there so that nobody's leaving the room saying, crap, we just signed up for 50%. I don't know how we're going to do that. Well, that's not a successful meeting. So anyway, a third party is important.
And I would say also too is when you're talking to those stakeholders is to identify what I would call your Walt Disney and your Roy Disney, right? Roy Disney is the one who, kept the balance sheet, right? And Walt Disney was the dreamer. So when you're talking to the, the more creative person, or the person who's essentially excited and jazzed about the creative elements of the campaign, or the Walt Disney, so to speak, that person ultimately is not going to understand the dashboards, the data analytics, and what have you, and doesn't want to look like a fool. So we'll usually agree to a lot, and will ultimately say, oh, I completely understand. So you also want to know that the Roy Disney is probably going to be very skeptical, and probably is going to think that they know a lot more than you do. So it's ultimately two different pitches, and identifying those stakeholders.
Sounds like that third party should be trained in psychoanalysis or therapy. That was a great question. I think, are we done?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Some of these guys, it's upfront week, and some of these guys have critical meetings to go to. And I want to thank them all for staying for this and kicking us off with a fantastic conversation that I think is going to reverberate throughout the day. Joe, panel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take about a 15-minute coffee break. When we come back, Joe is going to be talking with Johnny Silverman of Anheuser-Busch. So grab